Welcome to Eye on IMS, the new monthly video series covering various topics related to the world's leading microwave conference and exhibition, the IEEE MTTS International Microwave Symposium, that takes place next June in Atlanta, Georgia. In this first episode, we're going to cover how to submit a quality paper to the IMS conference as the call for papers is open. I'm Pat Hindle. I'm here with my co-host Gary LaRude. And to discuss this topic with us today, we have Jim and Brian Rautio from Sonnet Software. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hi.
You have both been involved in the IEEE MTTS activities for many years and done paper reviews on several conferences. So we appreciate your expert opinions of these questions. To start, can you briefly go over the review process for the IMS conference?
Sure, Pat, I'll take that question. One thing you should do for reviewing papers is there are four. We'll discuss it in a bit, but there are four categories that are important to address when you're going over. Oh, what the heck? Let's do that right now. You've got get the call for papers and look at it. There's two areas that are very, very important. This is the call for papers. Technical areas down in the document a little bit. There's one committee for each of these technical areas, and so it's very important to select the right technical area for your paper. And there's two alternatives that you put in as well. If you pick an area that the people on the committee don't know much about, they're going to say we'll pass it on to another committee. And the other committee doesn't get very much time to look at it. So your paper is a big disadvantage if you pick the wrong area. Be sure and try to pick the right area. With 40 papers and other things to do at the end of the year as well, expect to spend each reviewer can spend about 15 minutes per paper. So you've got to make your story in that 15 minutes per paper. And the other very important area is the points here that they grade. We actually put a numeric grade on each of these 4 points. Originality, it's got to be something new. Quantitative content, we're not philosophers, we're engineers. We need a number. You're nothing if you don't have a number. So you got to get a number in there. And clarity, we got 15 minutes to read this thing and understand it. It's got to be understandable. So put a lot of work into clarity. And interest to MTTS membership. If you've got the world's most fantastic paper on French Renaissance literature, it's not going to make it.
So having said that the reviewers have limited time to look through each of these papers, it would seem like the introduction would be pretty important. What is the goal for the introduction and what should it contain?
So one really important concept I like to start with is what an introduction isn't. A lot of people will take their abstract and act like it's a balloon and blow up the abstract. That's not what an introduction is. It's different, and that's why they're different sections. I like to think of it as, the reviewer is a system kind of like a computer. And when you load a program on a computer, it's putting the things it needs to run into RAM. And an introduction is a lot like that. You're giving the concepts, you're giving the data, and really setting up the reviewer so that they can comprehend your paper, right? You want to make your paper as easy to read and understand as you possibly can. And this is your chance to just set them up and get them in the right mindset so that they can do that successfully.
And keep in mind that some reviewers and some readers, many readers in fact, might just read the introduction. So you got to that's your elevator pitch. You got to sell them on reading the rest of your paper, investing the time in it, just based on that introduction and a couple other things that we'll mention in a bit.
Can you talk about a bit of the importance of organization and proofreading?
Some of the little things that are important to do, follow the format very precisely of the template that you get. Another couple little things, the keywords, put them in alphabetical order. Subtle little thing, it makes it look professional. Another one that people often miss, the figure notation. FIG, period, space, number, period, and then start your caption. And the captions should tell a story as you go through the paper. because some people might read only the abstract, might read the abstract and introduction, or they might just come down and start reading the captions. So the captions should tell a little story as you go through. And also always put a figure to catch the viewer's eye, because you got maybe 10 seconds as they flip past your paper to get the reader's interest. Put a nice figure that's very interesting to the reader in the top of the second column of the first page, because that's the ideal place for the lead graphic. A couple other very little things. When you come down, the references are often messed up, and so follow the reference format very, very precisely. Have somebody else read it too, just to make sure you follow the format.
So one really important thing with proofreading, a lot of people might get caught up on it like it's a high school essay and that they're going to lose points every time something's wrong. And that's not really the right idea. Everything should be as best as you can make it. The grammar should be easy to read, and you shouldn't be spelling things wrong and things like that. But it's really more about being able to communicate it to the reader and make the reader's job easier. If it's not well organized, that takes up more of that 15-minute block that the reviewer has. If there's lots of typos, the reviewer's going through, I mean, that's one thing I always do is if I find typos, grammatical errors, I make a list to send to the reader. That takes a lot of time. And so the more that you have like that, the less time the reviewer has to understand what you're doing and appreciate what you're doing. So that's really the crux of it. It's not that you're going to lose points for those typos, it's that it's taking attention away from the content, the meat of your work, and you really don't want to do that. So I think that's where most of the importance of that organization and proofreading comes from, and you really should spend a lot of time making sure that's as good as you can possibly make it before you submit.
So Jim, you mentioned using a interesting figure or photo to kind of catch the reader's interest. What other guidance would you provide about the use of figures and how to put information in figures and maybe tables as well?
One thing I do for figures is I use Adobe Illustrator. Whatever you do, do not do something on Excel and then do a screen dump and then paste it into your paper. That comes off pretty bad. You can use Adobe Illustrator. There are some free versions equivalent out there that you can use. Do it up nice with nice vector graphics. One thing you can do with Excel, do your plot up on Excel and then copy and paste it into Illustrator, and you actually get the vector graphics there, and then you can manipulate it. Another thing I don't do in figures typically is I don't use color to separate the data, because it might be color on the computer display, but then somebody prints out a black and white copy and the color information is gone. You don't know what curve goes with what. Another thing I do is rather than having a table of contents for the curves here, I actually, on many curves, I will draw lines to the curves. Let's see if I've got something like that here. But I will label the curves, put the label right beside the curve. In this case, the two curves are so almost exactly identical. I just made one thin black line and one wide gray line. So you can see that there really are two curves there. And the labels are large. Always have units, always have labels, have it clear numbers. So you can use this in a paper, and you can use this in a PowerPoint slide. When you're using it in a PowerPoint slide, remember, somebody 100 feet away might want to see what the number is. So you got to make them on the large size. Don't use tiny little stuff. Perhaps Brian has something else too.
In terms of figures, the biggest thing I can say there is to put your best foot forward. You know, you might have a lot of data that you spend a lot of time making, but if that's not the impact of your research, then it's not doing you as much good as some other data might. And so if you can take you know, something that's really impactful, you know, maybe you've made a filter that's got more bandwidth. Maybe you've made a resonator with a narrower Q. You know, whatever it is that is really the most impactful part, I would make sure that that's immediately visible. And that really goes back to that 15 minutes thing, because, you know, one of the first things I'll usually do as a reviewer is kind of skim through the paper and look at the figures. And you can kind of get a sense of what's going on, usually just from the figures, especially if they're done well. And that also complements the introduction, in that you're looking at it and you understand what's going on. And if you've got something, like I said, that's really impactful, whatever it is, something like that will probably stick in my head. And then when I'm reading through the paper, I'm going to look for, how that data came to be, what the, research technique was, what the equation is responsible for it, etc. It's going to be in the back of my mind while I'm reading that paper, and I'm going to be looking for that section. I'm going to spend extra time on it, and I'm going to understand better what your contribution is to the scientific record.
What are some of the best ways you've seen that capture the reviewer and reader's interest?
My first job was at GE Space Systems in Valley Forge, PA, outside of Philadelphia. And the person who sat across from me, he had an office. Of course, I was a new engineer. I'd sat in a cubicle. And the person was Kyo Tomiyasu, who is legendary in the MTT Society. He was sitting right across the aisle from me. And my first day there, he came over, sat down, and he started chatting with me. And we went over a paper that I was publishing. And he said, one thing you should do, you spend most of your time on the title. Get the title there so you can grab a person's interest. And he's the one that taught me that the captions, if you just read the captions, they should tell a story. But another trick was figure out who the reviewers might be. And this is good for IMS papers or transactions paper. Figure out who the reviewers might be. They have probably published in your area. They're selected because they have published in your area. Make sure in the introduction that you reference their papers, because there's nothing more irritating than a reviewer to review a paper. This guy does not reference my paper. And you don't want to get off on a bad foot there. And in the introduction, again, those four things are the originality, the quantitative, etc. If you can make it clear, read the paper for each one of those 4 items and say, I'm a reviewer, I want to assign a numeric grade on originality. How can I convince the reviewer within the first minute to give me a good grade on each of those 4 categories? So read it with respect to those 4 categories, because that's exactly what the reviewers are doing.
So I actually chuckled a little bit. I have very much the same answer, but I'm coming at it from a different angle. When you're assigned papers to review, especially for a conference, a lot of times you'll get a list. Maybe it's in Excel, maybe it's on the website. Similarly, if you're trying to do a literature search, you'll go to IEEE Explore, you'll get a list. You have exactly one thing that you can do to stand out in that list. That's where it all starts, and that's your title. You need to make your title clear, interesting, descriptive, relevant, all kinds of adjectives that you can throw at that. But that's really where it starts, is you've got somebody that's looking down a list of titles, and that's what you're competing against. You want to have the best paper with the best chance to get referenced, both after it's been published, best chance to get published in the first place. It just starts with that. I've seen a lot of people that will just try to accurately describe what they've done. And I'm not against that. This is science. We want to be accurate. We want to be precise. But also, this is the one chance that you have to stand out from the very start. First impression's worth everything. Focus on your title. Get a good title.
So comparing measured performance with the simulation seems to be maybe the most important part of the paper, since it really validates the design. How should authors make this part clear and impactful, and how should they address deficiencies between measured and simulated?
Yeah, I would say that this is a great place to talk about engineering versus science, what it means to be in a STEM field, things like that. I love old houses. We love restoring them and working on them. Sometimes old houses, structural deficiencies will pop up. And so one of the things that you do is you get a structural engineer to come out, and they take a bunch of measurements, do some math, and they'll usually make some conclusions. And the conclusion is usually, yes, this is good enough. This is structurally sound. That's engineering, making sure that what you're designing, what you're building, what you have, making sure it works right. When it comes to measurement versus simulation, I don't think you're in engineering anymore. I think now you're in science. You're talking about metrology. You're talking about precision. You're talking about accuracy and these things. So the best advice I can give here is not necessarily that you need to do this or you need to do that. Certainly you shouldn't be saying this is good enough. Good enough is not good enough. What you can do is, pretend you're working at one of these great scientific laboratories like NIST or NPL, and you're working on something and you want to quantify this as best as you possibly can. And when you go at it with that sort of attitude, even though you might not, some people probably literally do work for NIST and NPL, work, publishing for MTT. But even if you don't, and you strive for that, even if you don't get quite there, you're going to do a better job when you're doing this sort of quantification. When you get into well, this is plus or minus this percent. Well, this has this many significant figures. That sort of thing is what you want to talk about. You don't want to just look at it and say, those two lines are close. This is good enough to ship the device. So let's move on to the next section. No, this is science that we're talking about. You need to do better.
Yeah, be very, very precise with language, as Brian was here. Precision is the number of digits. Accuracy is how many of those digits are good. Never present numbers with more precision than what you have with accuracy. And if you don't know what the accuracy is, you've lost the battle right at the beginning.
A key milestone in an engineer's career is presenting that first paper at a conference. For engineers writing the first one, what guidance do you have for increasing the likelihood of the paper being accepted?
I'll supplement that with one of my favorite quotes. It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. What matters is how many times you get back up. And the first place I've seen that quote was in a book, Boys in the Boat. It's about the University of Washington, UW, crew team attending the 1938 Berlin Olympics. And they got knocked down hard so many times, but they got up every single time. Very inspiring story, as you can tell. But you will get knocked down. You will get, if you submit papers, you will get rejected. IMS is a difficult show to get a paper accepted to. It's double blind. The reviewers don't know who the authors are. The authors don't know who the reviewers are, hopefully. And I've had papers rejected. I've had actually a fair number of papers rejected. When you get the paper rejected, it's a hard feeling. It's those damn people, they don't want my paper. And after a day or so, it softens a little bit, and then you get back up. The important thing is to get back up. And when you get back up, or before you submit the first paper, go around and get the advice of people around you who have experience with this. Pass it in front. Pass it if you got a friend who's an English major. Give it to the English major and let him or her look through the paper. Somebody who's in a different technical field, somebody that's in your technical field, and get some advice on the paper. The advice from the people around you can be so valuable. And every time you get knocked down, not only will you get back up, you will get back up stronger.
One more thing that I want to add to, work like a dog. Take how much time you think it's going to take to write that paper. Now double it. Now double it again. Still not enough. It's immense amount of work to write a paper. Even though you say, oh, it's 3 pages, I could write an essay 3 pages long in an hour. No, it's completely different. This is an art of compression. You're taking work that you spent years doing and you're putting it in a couple of pages. If you've got a huge file on your computer and you make a zip archive of it, it takes a while, even as fast as computers are these days. It takes a while to do that. Writing a paper is the same way. It's not the time it takes to type the words or even to make the figures. It's the time that it takes, the effort it takes to compress all of that into something that's a few pages long that someone can read in 15 minutes. And one nice thing that I do want to bring up is that IMS this year has a 3-page format. And 3 pages is a fantastic amount of content because you can put an awful lot into it. But again, with the work like a dog, you've got to compress everything down to 3 pages. So it's kind of a win-win, but it's also something that's going to take more effort. Understand that. That's not going to make it easier that you write 3 pages instead of 4. What it's going to do is make it better.
At UW crew team, they won gold. Hitler was watching, they teed him off totally. So you will get knocked down, you will get back up, and you will, at some point, win gold.
Well, Jim and Brian, thank you for a very fascinating discussion, inspiring one, and for sharing your insights from your many years of experience.
Happy to be here, happy to share.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Next month, Pat and I will explore another topic related to the International Microwave Symposium on IMS. Thanks for watching.
That's a wrap.